The last hope of the Empire. The vastness of space stretched endlessly, a cold and unfeeling abyss, where stars flickered like distant beacons of hope. Inside the sleek, Carillion-class starship Astra's dawn, the hum of the engines resonated in the ship's bones as it streaked through hyperspace, carrying with it the last hope for the future of an empire. The ship was a blend of advanced technology and ancient tradition, a symbol of the Auuan Empire's glory, now tasked with safeguarding its fragile future. Captain Alexander Vance, a rugged and capable human, paced the narrow hallways of the starship, his boots echoing in the silence. His face was sharp, his dark hair slightly tousled, a day's worth of stubble adding a rough edge to his chiseled features. Despite the steady hum of the ship's systems, his thoughts were anything but calm. His gray eyes, intense and vigilant, scanned the corridors, the weight of the mission pressing down on him. His job was clear: protect Princess Astra, the heir to the throne of the Auuan Empire, until she reached the age of 21. But that was easier said than done. The princess was not just anyone. She was the future of a crumbling empire, an empire torn apart by political turmoil, internal strife, and external threats. Astra was the last hope for the Auuans, the last of the royal bloodline, capable of uniting the warring factions under a single banner. The emperor's enemies knew this all too well, and their shadows loomed ever closer. Assassination, kidnapping, betrayal. These were the weapons they wielded, and they would stop at nothing to strike at the heart of the empire through its most vulnerable point: the princess. The mission was as clear as it was dangerous. Alexander had been entrusted with the highest level of security by Emperor Auuan himself. His orders were simple: get Astra off-world, keep her hidden, and protect her until she came of age. On her 21st birthday, the princess would be crowned Empress, her destiny fulfilled, and the empire would be reborn. But until that moment came, she was a target, and Alexander was the one man standing between her and the forces that wished to see her, and the empire, destroyed. Despite the clear urgency of the situation, Alexander had been unsettled by something he couldn't quite place. Every instinct he had honed through years of service to the emperor told him that something was amiss. He could feel it in the air, a subtle tension that gnawed at the edges of his mind. The walls of the Astra's dawn might be made of the most advanced materials known to the Auuan Empire, but they felt no more secure than the hollow chambers of his doubts. He trusted no one but himself, and his training had taught him that no mission was ever without its dangers. As he made his way toward the princess's quarters, his thoughts were interrupted by the sudden buzz of his communicator. He answered it with a curt, "Vance here." "Captain," came the voice of Lieutenant Auuan, his most trusted officer. "We've just crossed the border into the neutral zone. No sign of pursuit, yet." "Good," Alexander replied, his tone barely betraying his unease. "But keep your eyes open. This mission is far from over. No one knows where we are, and it needs to stay that way." "Understood." "Understood, sir. We're ready for anything." "See that you are," Alexander muttered, cutting the transmission. He turned the corner and approached the door to the princess's private chambers. His hand hovered over the door chime, but something told him to be cautious. A slight hesitation, a nagging feeling at the back of his mind, held him in place. For a brief moment, he thought about the princess, the young woman who had been thrust into the position of inheriting a throne she didn't ask for, the weight of a broken empire resting on her delicate shoulders. She had been kind to him, respectful even though he was a mere human and her protector. But she was also a child, barely out of adolescence, and the empire was a beast that showed no mercy, even to its most royal heirs. Alexander pressed the chime, his brow furrowing as he waited. No answer. A frown crossed his face. He knocked gently, then more urgently. Still, there was nothing. His heart rate quickened as a sense of unease gripped him. The protocols were clear. He was to keep constant watch over the princess. The fact that she wasn't responding sent a wave of anxiety rippling through him. "Princess Astra," he called, his voice carrying through the door. "Are you in there?" There was no reply. His instincts screamed at him to take action. With a muttered curse, he stepped forward and typed in the security override code, his fingers moving with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The door hissed open with a soft whir, and he stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. The space was lavishly furnished, as befitting the princess's status. Luxurious silks and plush cushions lined the walls, and delicate holographic art flickered across the room, casting a soft, otherworldly glow. The bed, a massive structure adorned with celestial patterns, was empty. His heart skipped a beat. Where was she? The absence of Astra was disconcerting, but it wasn't the first time she had slipped away unnoticed. The princess was known to be restless, often exploring the ship's many corridors or retreating to quiet corners to read or meditate. But this time felt different. There was something about the stillness of the room that felt wrong. Alexander's hand hovered over the control panel that would open the next door, the bedroom. He pressed it, the door sliding open with a soft swoosh. His breath caught in his throat as he stepped inside. The princess was gone. In the center of the room stood a small ornate table, but there was no sign of the young woman who had once been seated there. A few scattered data pads and a half-empty glass of water were the only signs that she had been here recently. A sudden chill ran down his spine. He reached for his communicator and activated it, his voice tight with tension. "Auuan, I need a full scan of the ship, now. Princess Astra is missing." The reply came almost immediately. "Captain, we've already begun searching. There's no sign of her anywhere on the ship. Check the escape pods, check the cargo bay, every corner. I want her found now." His mind raced. He couldn't afford to lose her. Not now. Not when the future of the Empire was on her shoulders. As he stood there, the walls of the starship closing in on him, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that the mission had taken a darker turn. The princess had vanished, and with her, the fragile hope of a broken empire. Shadows of betrayal. The starship Astra's dawn hummed through the vastness of space, its lights flickering with a sense of urgency as its mission teetered on the brink of disaster. Captain Alexander Vance stood in the center of the control room, his eyes narrowed, scanning the holographic display that mapped the layout of the ship. There was no sign of Princess Astra, no indication of where she had gone. Every crew member was searching frantically, and yet, the silence was deafening. She had vanished. "Captain, we've combed every inch of the ship," Lieutenant Auuan said, his voice tight with frustration as he approached Alexander, a data pad in his hand. "There's no trace of her anywhere. No records of her accessing the ship's systems or security protocols. It's like she just disappeared." Alexander's jaw clenched, his mind racing. It was as if the princess had been swallowed by the ship itself. He knew she had her moments of independence, often slipping away to wander the ship, but never like this. Never without a trace. Something wasn't right. The nagging feeling in his chest, the one he couldn't shake since this mission began, was now a storm of suspicion and dread. "Search the hidden compartments," Alexander ordered, his voice low and controlled, though his heart pounded in his chest. "The ones we use for emergencies, places where no one would think to look. We can't afford to leave any stone unturned." Auuan nodded and left immediately to carry out the order. Alexander turned back to the holographic display, his mind consumed by the possibility that they were no longer alone in the galaxy. The enemy's reach, which had once seemed far away, was now far too close. It was clear that the threat was not just from within the Empire. Something much darker was afoot, and the only person who could have orchestrated this betrayal was someone inside the royal circle. But who? The Emperor's enemies were well known. They were ruthless factions that sought to dismantle the Empire, each with their own motives for wanting Astra dead or incapacitated before she could inherit the throne. But Alexander had been trained for this. He was the best, trusted by Emperor Auuan to protect the princess at all costs. It had been his sole mission for the past 2 years to ensure Astra's safety, to keep her hidden from the chaos that swirled around the Empire. The princess had always been his priority, and now he had failed her. It stung like a wound that wouldn't heal. His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp trill of the communication system. He stepped over to the console, his heart racing. A voice crackled over the speaker. "Captain Vance, this is the commander of the Stellar Falcon, a neutral freighter. We have an urgent communication for you. It's from someone claiming to be from the royal court." His pulse quickened. The royal court. The very same people who had entrusted him with Astra's safety, the ones who had sworn to protect her at all costs. Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. If this was some sort of trap, he was walking into it with his eyes wide open. But what choice did he have? The princess was gone, and if there was any chance, any lead that could guide him to her, he would take it. "Put it through," he commanded, his voice tight with tension. The screen flickered, and a holographic image of a man appeared. He was tall, with pale skin and sharp features, dressed in the regal garb of the royal court. His eyes, however, were cold, calculating. His lips curled into a thin smile as he spoke. "Captain Vance," the man said, his voice smooth but laced with hidden menace. "I trust you're enjoying your little game of hide and seek." "Who are you?" Alexander demanded, his fingers twitching toward the weapon holstered at his side. "Where is the princess?" The man laughed, a low, mocking sound. "The princess is safe, for now. But I think you'll find that your mission is more complicated than you ever imagined. You see, the royal court has changed its plans. The princess no longer has any use to us. And as for you, well, let's just say you've outlived your usefulness." Alexander's mind raced, his thoughts spinning. This wasn't just a random threat. It was personal. The voice was familiar, and the man's words confirmed what he had feared. Betrayal. The royal court had turned on Astra, and possibly on him as well. But why? What had changed in the past 2 years? Who had the audacity to make such a bold move against the princess? "You're lying," Alexander growled, his hand gripping the console tightly. "You think I'll just fall for this? I will find her. And when I do, I'll make sure you regret this." The man's smile widened, a gleam of sadistic pleasure flashing in his eyes. "You will find her, Captain, but not in the way you expect. Time is running out, and I suggest you act quickly. Because once Astra reaches her 21st birthday, it will be too late. You'll be too late." The transmission abruptly ended, the screen flickering to black. Alexander stood there for a moment, frozen in shock, the weight of the words crashing down on him like a tidal wave. What had he just heard? The princess wasn't just in danger. She was a pawn in a much larger game, one where the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. Betrayal. It was the one thing he had never anticipated. It made no sense. The royal court had been steadfast in their devotion to the princess, and yet now, there were enemies within their own ranks. He had to act, and he had to act fast. Turning on his heel, Alexander stormed out of the control room, his eyes burning with determination. He would find Astra, no matter what it took. His instincts told him that she was still close, that whoever had taken her was not far behind. And with the fate of an empire hanging in the balance, he would stop at nothing to ensure her safety. As he made his way through the ship's narrow hallways, a deep sense of urgency settled over him. The princess was no longer just an innocent target. She was the key to the future, and whoever controlled her held the power to reshape the galaxy itself. Alexander's mind raced as he prepared to confront the shadows that had betrayed him. He wasn't just fighting to protect Astra anymore. He was fighting to save the entire Auuan Empire from descending into chaos. The real enemy was out there, hidden among the stars, and Alexander would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. But the road ahead would be perilous, filled with treachery and deceit. As the Astra's dawn sped through the cold emptiness of space, the stakes grew higher. And with each passing second, the race against time grew ever more critical. The heart of darkness. The Astra's dawn drifted silently through the inky void of space, a lonely speck in the vastness of the galaxy. Captain Alexander Vance stood in the command center, his eyes locked on the endless expanse of stars. They had been searching for hours, but it felt like days. The princess was still missing, and with every passing moment, the threat grew more imminent. The cryptic message from the royal court had left a bitter taste in his mouth, one that could not be easily washed away. Someone within the empire was betraying the princess, and Alexander had no intention of letting them succeed. He paced back and forth, his hands clenched into fists, trying to focus his mind. Betrayal was something he understood well. He'd seen it before, in his years of military service. But this was different. The stakes were higher. The princess wasn't just a target. She was the future of the empire, the hope of a broken civilization that had been fractured by years of war and corruption. Without her, the empire would crumble. And if the court was truly complicit in her disappearance, then everything Alexander had fought for would be lost. Captain, Lieutenant Auuan's voice broke through his thoughts, pulling him back to reality. The officer stood in the doorway, his expression tense. "We've found something." Alexander's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Auuan stepped forward, holding up a data pad, the holographic screen flickering with a series of encrypted files. "We managed to crack part of the communication we intercepted earlier. It's from someone in the royal court, but it's not just a message. It's a list of coordinates. Coordinates that point to an abandoned mining colony on the outskirts of the Callian Belt. It looks like a hideout." A cold shiver ran down Alexander's spine. The Callian Belt was a desolate region of space, known for its lawlessness and dangerous inhabitants. It was a place where empires had lost ships, where pirates and mercenaries roamed freely, far from the watchful eyes of authority. If Astra was there, it was worse than he had feared. "Get the coordinates to the navigation system. We're going there now," Alexander said, his voice sharp. "Prepare the crew, and make sure the ship is battle-ready. We may not be alone." "Understood, sir," Auuan replied, nodding quickly and hurrying off to carry out the orders. As Alexander moved to the command console, his mind raced. He had no illusions about the dangers that lay ahead. The Callian Belt was not a place for the weak, and if the royal court had orchestrated this plot, there were more forces at play than he had anticipated. Whoever had orchestrated the princess's disappearance had planned this down to the smallest detail, and Alexander knew that if they didn't act fast, the princess would be lost forever. The ship's engines hummed to life as Astra's dawn adjusted its course toward the coordinates Auuan had provided. The stars outside shifted into streaks of light as they entered hyperspace, and Alexander's thoughts grew even more consumed with worry. What had they done to Astra? Was she still alive? He couldn't afford to let his emotions cloud his judgment, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. Every passing minute felt like an eternity. The minutes stretched into hours as they neared the Callian Belt. Alexander stared at the star map in front of him, the desolate blackness of the belt creeping closer. He knew the risks. The region was riddled with debris from old battles, abandoned ships, and the remnants of forgotten colonies. It was a place where fugitives hid and pirates thrived, where even the most skilled navigators could easily become lost. But it was also a place where people like him, people who knew how to survive in the dark corners of the galaxy, could still make a difference. The ship emerged from hyperspace with a jolt, the vast blackness of the Callian Belt stretching out before them, like a void unwelcoming and cold. The sensors flickered briefly, as if protesting the harsh conditions, but soon settled, offering a patchwork of scattered signals and anomalies. Auuan's voice crackled through the comms. "We've got a visual on the colony," he said, his tone steady but filled with underlying tension. "It's an old mining facility, just like the intel suggested. There's no sign of activity, but the place is off. It looks abandoned, but we're not taking any chances." Alexander nodded, his jaw tightening. This was it. The place where they would either find Astra or confirm their worst fears. He turned to his crew, his voice steady, but filled with the urgency of the moment. Prepare for landing. I want a full sweep of the area. No one is to leave the ship until I give the order. Understood. Understood, sir. The crew responded in unison. The ship descended into the belt, the dark, rocky surface of the mining colony coming into view. It was an eerie sight, a crumbling structure surrounded by jagged cliffs, its once pristine walls now scorched by time and neglect. The air outside was thick with the scent of old metal and rust, the remnants of a once thriving operation now abandoned and forgotten. As the landing gears touched down with a soft thud, Alexander felt the weight of the situation settle heavily on his shoulders. This was it. This was the moment where everything would either fall into place or spiral into chaos. "We move out in 5 minutes," Alexander ordered, his voice calm but resolute. "No one gets left behind. We bring the princess back, or we don't come back at all." The crew nodded, and the air was thick with tension as they prepared for what lay ahead. Alexander's mind was a blur of strategy and preparation. He had trained for moments like this, but the stakes had never been so high. Every step they took now would bring them closer to the truth, but it would also bring them closer to danger. As they disembarked from the ship, the cold wind of the Callian belt cut through their suits. The abandoned colony loomed ahead like a specter, its darkened windows staring out into the void. Alexander's hand rested on the hilt of his sidearm, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of movement. He could feel it, the presence of something out there, something watching them from the shadows. "Stay sharp," he whispered to his team as they moved forward, their footsteps muffled on the rocky ground. "We don't know who or what is waiting for us." The silence that enveloped them was suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of the Astra's dawn and the creak of the old mining structures around them. Alexander's heart pounded in his chest as they approached the entrance to the facility. The door, once grand and imposing, was now rusted and barely hanging on its hinges. With a steady hand, Alexander pushed it open. The interior of the facility was cold, the air stale with the scent of abandoned machinery and old metal. It was like walking into a ghost town, and Alexander's instincts told him that they weren't the only ones there. "Move out," he ordered, his voice a low growl. "Keep it tight." The team moved quickly, checking every corner, every shadow. It wasn't long before they reached the central chamber of the facility. The room was vast, its walls lined with rows of old mining equipment, now long unused. At the center of the room stood a massive containment chamber, the type used for storing precious ores. But inside the chamber wasn't a mineral, it was the princess. Astra stood there, her eyes wide with fear, her hands bound by glowing energy restraints. She was alive. But for how long? Alexander's breath caught in his throat. The princess was here, but the real question was, who else was hiding in the dark corners of the Callian belt, waiting for the right moment to strike?